Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. My name is Jason.
And my name is Steve.
And Steve is a licensed marriage and family therapist with over 30 years experience, and I'm the guy who asks him questions. How this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's topic is why authenticity matters.
Wow.
So I'll let you ponder that for a bit. And while Steve does that, before we get into the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so stay tuned for that.
Well, I like the question, but I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm curious why you chose this one.
That's great, because I wrote a little something about that. So
writer's right.
Yeah. I think I've come to the realization, I'm 39, that I don't think I was ever 100% my authentic self in any of my romantic relationships. And I think there were parts of me that were authentic, but I don't know if my authenticity was ever fully realized. And I don't know if this is because I was just young or because I was scared, various reasons. You're kind of afraid of judgment or fear of being left, or maybe you have codependency issues, or just not even understanding or knowing how to express your sexual needs, or feeling comfortable talking about sex. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, I didn't have the language to even have to describe that, but all that language allowed me to become more authentic by doing all that. So it's just something that I just kind of came to realize, and it's kind of crazy, like how many people are in relationships and they're not even being who they truly are. They're hiding things for various reasons. And so I'm trying to say, like, what is so important about authenticity in relationships and like building like a lasting.
This is really a tough one because, it's sort of insubstantial and not particularly objective. I'm going to try to make it a little more objective. Like you, I think I've let's just use the word lie. I think I've lied a fair amount in my romantic history, but I don't think I was aware of it at the time. I really, first of all, I think it isn't perhaps so much age, because I can imagine lots of young people being far more authentic than I was, but I think I had a lack of experience and a lack of I had an impaired observing ego. I didn't really know who I was. So it wasn't as though I was presented with a dilemma. Do I let her in on who I really am? Or do I, say what I think needs to be said so I can get laid? And I remember it was after my divorce from my first marriage, and I was dating a woman, having what many people will recognize when I use the term. I was having the pre-makeout conversation after our first date. And we were sitting on her couch in her apartment.
This is the pre-makeout?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had never kissed or done anything like that. And she was an absolutely wonderful human being. And later, as it turned out, not the right human being for me, nor I the right person for her. But she said something that just really struck me. And what she said was, I was kind of coyly batting her eyes. She had beautiful eyelashes. And she said, I just don't want to get hurt. And I burst out laughing. And she reacted as if I were in the high school play, but I'd flubbed my lines. Because what are we supposed to say?
Yeah.
We're supposed, if you're really hoping to get laid that day, you're supposed to say something like, "Oh, baby, I would never hurt you."
Yeah.
And
then you're making out. And
yeah.
It goes from there.
Yeah. And it goes from there. But the thing that struck me as so comedic, there were a number of comedic elements. She actually kindly gave me a second chance and repeated her remark as if I had not laughed. Okay. She said, "I just really don't want to get hurt." This time I lost it. I fell off the couch. I was literally pounding the floor, tears running down my face, laughing so hard. And I clawed my way back up to my seat. And I looked at her and I said, look, you say that as if women are the only ones who could ever get hurt in a relationship. And as if I'm the potential predator here and you're the potential victim, the fragile little soul who could get hurt by my errant ways. And I said, actually, the only reason I wanted to date you was because I had the impression that you were a strong, capable woman, and that if we got involved more deeply, we would both be at equal risk of being hurt or being disappointed. And furthermore, I said, the odds are that it's not going to work out between us. Because most of the time when two people are dating, it doesn't work out. So, when you think of all the people between us that we've dated, how many of those have worked out? Well, the odds are, very slim that it's going to work out between us, but I'm willing to go forward and find out.
Yeah.
And she, to her credit, she looked down, thought about it for a second, and then she looked at me and said, "Me too." And I'm not going to tell the audience what happened after that, but it was just one of those moments where currying favor, being manipulative, just weren't appealing to me. I didn't feel like saying the inauthentic thing, because by this time in my life,
and that would have been really quick. That would have been, "Oh, baby, I would never hurt you."
Yeah. But by this time in my life, I had really grown really comfortable with myself, comfortable inside of my own skin. And I realized if I was ever going to be in a relationship, and that's with any woman, I really wanted to be loved for who I genuinely was. Because with the inauthentic self, I get to curry favor and receive approval. But with the genuine self, or the real self, I get to let the other person in on who I really am, how I really think. And it's true, I face perhaps more risk of out and out rejection, but I also am favored with the possibility of a reward for being loved for who I really am. And I think that's really my number one selling point on all of us, men and women, being our authentic selves, because we really can't realistically expect every person we date to like us equally. But there's going to be some, what I call fair market share, some given percentage of the population, even if it's only 1% or a fraction of 1%, that's going to think, "Oh, Jason, he is the most amazing man I've ever met." Or Stephen Ing, my God, what a human being. And, and that's the kind of woman I want to be in a relationship with. And that's what I've built with my own wife, where we're each quite bullish on the other. We're big fans of one another. She's the one who introduced that term to me, and she said that she's the president of my fan club. And I laughed when I heard her say that, but it's perfectly mutual. I'm very enthusiastic about her and engage in what I would call extravagant appreciation and love for one another with her. And I think that's impossible if we're inauthentic. I don't think we can establish that. So whatever is forbidden, that's what we need to say. And we don't need to say it all on the first date. But eventually, and I think quite naturally as conversations unfold, we're bound to be asked, "Well, how do you feel about X, fill in the blank?" And it could be politics or religion or sexuality or relationships or anything. And to be able to diplomatically, but honestly, let the other person in on who I really am and what I really think. I don't need to be needlessly confrontational or needlessly aggressive when it's politics or religion or something else. But I think to let the other person know that I've considered the idea, if I have, and that I've thoughtfully come to some sort of conclusion that seems to be true now, but at the same time that I'm perfectly open to being wrong. And then for some people, oh, that's the end of it, because you've told them that you don't like, their sacred cow or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I'm reading Richard Dawkins. What is it called? His book on religion.
Something with God in it. I know.
The God Delusion. Thank you for prompting my memory. I'm reading the book and it's just a delight. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this guy will never get a date, and at least not in America. But I'm assuming he's quite happily involved with somebody, because he's quite clear about who he is, what he thinks, what he believes. And so, he will be not necessarily rejected by those who are religious, because I don't think that that's true. I think there are thoughtful religious people out there who are going to be very, very much of the mind that he's a very provocative thinker and very interesting to get to know. But then there are others who are going to be quite quick to reject him. And I think, why not? Why not? Why should we not take the risk of being rejected? Not that we engineer rejection and that we look for rejection, but the risk, and to take it with some equanimity. In fact, I would say even cheerfully, because the benefit is, oh, I'm not going to be with somebody who could never, ever accept me for who I am.
Well, isn't it also a act of self-love, kind of, to respect yourself and say the things that you want to say and that you believe? And if the person rejects that, you could still love yourself aside from that thing.
Well, I'm tempted to turn that into a joke, just because I've never really felt that feeling of self-love. I just imagine the comedian kissing his own hand and then up his own arm and that sort of thing. But
you never felt this, like, some love for yourself.
No. I'm really truly now. I can say now I am truly grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my existence in a way I wasn't when I was a young man dating.
Okay.
But if that can pass for self-love, self-love, just the notion kind of creeps me out. It seems vaguely incestuous.
Have you ever had self-hatred?
Self-loathing, yes.
Self-loathing?
Yes.
So then
also equally irrational, right?
Yeah.
So I think but for me to feel grateful for my life means, and I don't want to give it up. I can easily give up a given position on politics or religion or some social issue. And I can easily give that up because I remember, I've been wrong so very many times before. I could easily be wrong right now. So if someone brings up a really great argument or provides me with evidence that for a politician changing his mind would be called flip-flopping, I'm not uncomfortable with changing my mind when faced with a new provocative line of thought that really makes sense. Okay. And so I'm open to growing. And if I am greeted on a date with rejection, it's really no cause for alarm, because last I read there's like 4 billion women on the planet. So and maybe only 1 billion of them are roughly in my age range. But I think I would be okay with those kinds of odds. Even if I only met with the approval of, say, 0.5%, I think I would do okay. There'd be an embarrassment of riches.
Do you feel like you struggled with rejection ever? Or do you feel like you were one of the lucky ones that when you got rejected, you're like, well, it's okay. It's like you
well, I think to deny that I suffered from the fear of rejection would be rather self-aggrandizing on my part. I think reasoning backwards, why else would I have been deceptive or minimizing the truth about who I am and what I really think? I think to some degree, so it's on a continuum, right? On a scale like so many other things, being conservative, being liberal. And I think I must have had that, but I was never really consciously aware. Mm-hmm. And yet, if I look back over my past, I was very much caught up in a pattern of people pleasing and deception. Mm-hmm. And I think for those out there who are still doing that, I can tell you the alternative lifestyle, just simply learning to enjoy yourself, love yourself, to use your
crazy, there you go.
To use your crazy term, or to use my term, really achieving gratitude for the person you've become. I think it means you wouldn't want to give that up, that person.
Yeah.
And that's not under any circumstances. And not so that you could be accepted by any particular social group, mm-hmm. not so that you could get the votes of people who would not really want someone like you in office. For me, it's, today, in my current age, which is incredibly advanced, I have a lot of equanimity about people not liking me. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that, so as far as like, how long did that behavior go then? So you married when you were how old again? Was it 19 or 20?
20.
So you married at 20, and do you feel like you were doing the people pleasing and those sort of behaviors and being inauthentic when you got into that relationship just because you didn't know who you were? Or?
Well, this is a wonderful, another kind of perspective on this. Yeah, I was people pleasing, and again, it was a mix. It wasn't all one thing, but I was, like so many people, just really wanting a girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. Not the right girlfriend, but a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And so being charming and smooth talking and all of that would be part of that whole presentation of self. And then the problem is you only have to keep it up for a lifetime.
Yeah. You're not charming, smooth talking.
Well, I think my wife might say that I am, but I think that if you're being inauthentic, the problem is over time, you just can't keep fooling people.
Yeah.
So that's really the problem. And I just think I wanted to be so liked by this person, whoever it was, whether it was my former wife or the person I was dating at the time. And then by the time I got out of that marriage, I think all those nerve endings that are about people pleasing, they were pretty much burned out. Mm. They were just fried. And I wanted to experience what I think is one of my highest values, certainly in the top 10. And that's the freedom to simply be myself. Mm. And I was resigned to the idea that it would be okay if I lived alone the rest of my life.
I think that's, again, like where you have to get with it. Like that's where I've got, like a few months ago, I was telling you that I had to like just come to terms with that idea because you mentioned it in a podcast or whatever Psychology Today article. And it's like you get that idea, like to be alone and then you're like, no, like you want to like fight it. But then if you sit there and meditate with it and think on it, and it's like the choice is to become the authentic version of me and risk that thing of being alone, or continue to be deceptive or people pleasing or whatever behaviors you're doing that is giving up that authenticity to convince somebody to be with you.
Yeah. And I have had a similar journey, and it's, as we look back over our shoulder into the past, it's almost comedic how we were really childish and silly about being afraid of this because, as I said earlier, the odds are that somebody out there is going to like me. I mean, after all, Charlie Manson, he had women approaching him all the time. Adolf Hitler had women approaching him all the time. And I just think for any normal guy, if he could just discover who he genuinely is and become at peace with himself, that alone just is so attractive, because a calm person who has a lot of self-assurance and confidence is actually much more attractive than the somewhat poodle-like humping of girls' legs, trying to get approval, trying to get a pat on the head, trying to get something that really we don't think is authentically going to belong to us if we're ourselves. So I really, for me, the payoff has been enormous in just that sense of freedom to be who I am and to live my life the way I like living it. And it hasn't been lonely at all. Besides, wonderful friends, I did manage to date a number of wonderful women before meeting my wife, and my future wife, that is. And they were all, I think all those dates were somewhat practice sessions in terms of learning to be authentic, learning to be genuine. And there were times when I can think of 2 other times when I was tempted to be inauthentic. And I think each of these examples would maybe resonate with a number of listeners. One time it was with an absolutely beautiful woman who was interested in dating me. And this is a 2-parter, as a matter of fact. Okay. There's like a happy part and a less than happy part. Good. But the happy part was she presented, we were out having a drink, just getting to know each other. And we were both interested in having a relationship someday soon. And she batted her eyes. I don't know why women do that all the time, but there's a lot of eye batting in my history. And she batted her eyes demurely and looked down and said, I just really want to be courted, and I think every woman deserves that. Mm. And I made some sort of a face, and I don't even remember what it was right now, but I said, yeah, I guess it was a face of regret. I'm probably not the right guy for you then. And
you're not a quarter?
I said, because for me, I really believe in this notion of equality, and I think chivalry has had to evolve so that men and women can each take responsibility for initiating social contact and for establishing equality from the very beginning in a relationship. So, and then, so she looked down and there was this long, thoughtful pause. And
it's another repetitive thing in your relationships.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
he down, pausing.
Well, and it's because I think some of these things women I dated were so used to having men jump through the hoop in order to go to the next level.
Yeah.
And she, again, it was very funny. And in the moment, at least it was to me, she started talking about how she liked to repair her own cars and how she did her own oil changes and how she, and it was her notion of pivoting toward equality.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was just funny. It had nothing to do with, I hadn't said anything about cars or do your own damn maintenance, lady, or anything like that. But, I walked her out to her car and
check the oil. No.
And she invited me out to dinner.
All right.
And this is, all within, 20, 30 minutes of her opening salvo being, she's the kind of girl who wants to be courted.
Yeah.
And I share that because I think so many of us men and women thoughtlessly say certain lines because we think somehow they make sense or they're revealing or they're comfortable, I guess. And then when presented with someone who doesn't jump through the hoop as we might have expected, a lot of us are capable of adapting to the change and moving forward with trying to establish a connection. So to her credit, that was absolutely fantastic. And we dated each other and we kind of took turns, which is not a thing in my brain. I don't keep a tally of who's dating, whose turn is it to pay or whose turn is it to ask the other person out. But we did that for a while. And then one day we're at dinner and I believe it was on my dollar, I can't recall, but she said, well, and again, with the eye batting and the demure, looking down as if she'd been deeply wounded, she said, I just could never be with anyone who had ever cheated on their partner. And I listened to her and I looked at the hurt in her face. And, most guys have got a really strong internal taboo against leaning into that kind of hurt. And for whatever reason, again, I think it was because I love freedom and I wanted to be truthful. And I just told her, yeah, I'm probably the wrong guy for you then.
Mm.
Because, and frankly, I don't know how many people haven't made mistakes of that kind, but I had. And I let her know that. And for her, in that moment, that was a bright line, the crossing of which disqualified anybody.
Yeah, that was a deal breaker.
Yeah. So for any kind of history where you had, like, say, had a girlfriend in high school and you cheated on her, or you had had a fiance or a live-in girlfriend, or even a wife and you'd had an affair, then that meant not the guy for her. And I want to say something about that. I think that's important as a footnote. When we put some litmus test like that out there, we're almost always guaranteed to get a lie right back, because very few people are going to have, I think, the self-appreciation, not self-love, but the appreciation of their own life and their own freedom and their own authenticity to disclose that, because that's like a sexual sin that who wants to come out with that during a date? Yeah. Right? Especially after the other person has said that just absolutely wouldn't work for her. So she looked out, she excused herself, and she was gone for a few minutes in the bathroom. She came back out and she said, I think I'd like you to take me home. And I did. And we did not date ever again. And the rest of the story is that, a year later, she called me back and she wanted to go out. And I'm thinking, she didn't share this, but I'm thinking, because I was already involved with the woman who was later to become my wife, I think what she found out was, if people were really honest with each other, none of us is without sin. All have fallen short. And I think she realized, oh, yeah, he too had fallen short, but he was at least willing to be honest about it. Yeah. So I was worth a callback, a year later. And it just kind of clarified things for me. And that was a really great experience. So on the one hand, on that first date where we were having a drink, my honesty and my self-disqualifying, I don't think I'm the right guy for you, it took her to another level and think she could change. The next time she gave me an opportunity to be authentic and about something that she really wanted, it was just too much. And I think for me, it was her naivete in not understanding how common people crossing that sort of sexual taboo is. It's extremely common, even in marriages. Over 50% of married women have had affairs. And well over 60% of married men have had affairs. So the majority, it's not a matter of if, but more like I think one should be thinking about when. When my mate has some sort of difficulty in that area, how do I want to handle that? And I think the correct answer is, it depends. Because if I had said to her, oh my God, yeah, I cheat on all my girlfriends, that would be a cavalier sort of disregard for people and their feelings. But she didn't even ask me about the circumstances and what was going on in the relationship, or how did it come about. And it was just this moral absolute in her mind. Yeah. It'd be a little bit like if I had said the same thing to her, or if I had said something like, well, I could never be with some woman who'd had an abortion. And really, that's such a weird line in the sand, because that particular behavior would have nothing to do with a partner's potential future behavior. Yeah. So, but discussing it would be really informative, I think. So whenever any of us reach some of these deal breakers, whatever they are, whether they're deeply significant or they're just superficial but still relevant to us, like somebody smoking cigarettes would be a deal breaker for me. I don't know that I need to get deeply into cigarette smoking. And
what about cigars? What if she likes smoking a cigar once a year?
Oh, so yeah. See, there you go. Because once a year it would be like nothing.
All right.
Yeah.
Twice a year.
Yeah. When does a fetus become a baby?
Can I give you a scenario and have you respond to it?
Sure.
So what if say with that woman, when she asked you that question, what if you then broke that authenticity and then told her no and lied? Where do you think that would have led you?
Well,
or for people who maybe do get that, because I mean, I think that just happens so much in relationships where someone gets hit with the question. So just coming
question out of the blue that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, and then you say the thing, and then it continues on. And so what is your, like, how does that work? And from your perspective, not saying it's.
Well, I actually had that situation come up, and
you got all of them.
Yeah, I've failed in so many ways, but it's not exactly what you're saying, but it was similar. So when I did meet the woman who later became my current wife, and she had a young son. He was 3 years old, and he'd always had his mother to himself because of the timing of her split from her ex, and he was very jealous, and I think jealous in the sense of insecure, because he. Am I still important? Does mommy still love me? Why is mommy paying all this attention to this new guy? And one time she was giving me a hug. It was during a visit, and she was giving me a visit to my home because she was from out of state. And she was giving me a hug, and he came up from behind and launched himself at her and pushed her really hard.
All right.
And this was about his, I don't know, 10th annoying little behavior. And I reached behind her and I took his hand, one of his two hands, and I squeezed his hand between the forefinger and the thumb in that meaty area where there's a nerve, and I inflicted pain.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I was so annoyed with him. And he pulled back. I'm sure every parent can imagine this. He pulled back and he took in this very deep breath. It was like a comedy scene. It was just, and I knew what was coming because he then like let out this wail of, pain and indignation and anger. And she turned and said, "Oh, what's wrong?" And he hurt me. And she looked up at me. She was kneeling at his level, and she looked up at me with eyes filled with adoration. I'm sure he didn't mean to. Now, I could have passively gone along with that, right? But I was tempted to, because I so adored this woman that I really didn't want to endanger the relationship. And I said, well, actually, and then I confessed, I told her the truth. And I
you're like Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That's high praise.
Yeah.
I did mean to hurt him. And she said, she said this other equally understanding thing, like, well, I know that he can be hard to handle sometimes, or something like that. And I said, and that's when I really took the gloves off, and I, told her the truth. I said, actually, it's not him. It's just that I'm so gutless. I have a hard time telling you the truth. And the truth is, and she said, "Oh," and I said, she was very open, and she had a smile on her face at the time, and which encouraged me. And I said, "Yeah, I keep seeing him do things like this, but you never put him in check. There's never any consequence. And it's just, you're very kind and loving. And I think you put up with this. And that's one of the reasons why it keeps continuing. And I'm so chicken shit of losing you. I've had a hard time being really honest with you about how much this is bugging me. And then she really got a serious look on her face, and she said to me, these are conversations I'll never forget. She said, well, what do you think I should do? And that, I'd already figured out as a therapist, I can be the boyfriend or the therapist, but I can't be both.
Yeah.
And so I said, and I told her that, and she said, well, yeah, but you must have some ideas. I said, I've got tons of ideas, but I don't dare tell you one of them. And she said, well, come on, a little something. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I would suggest that if it were me, I think I might go to a bookstore and look for a book on child rearing and discipline. And she said, can I borrow your keys? And she borrowed my keys, took my car, went to Barnes & Noble. Shout out to Barnes & Noble. And she got a book. I'm not going to endorse this book, but it was a decent one. And she read half of it before she left the house. She read the other half before her flight arrived home. She began changing the behaviors, and it was very humane. And her approach was still very humane, but it was like, I think what was going on inside of me, frankly, is this inherent sexism so many of us men have, that women are fragile, that they are somewhat childlike in their naivete and their innocence, and that ultimately we can't count on them as adults because they aren't competent. And it was her reaction to me taught me volumes about how very wrong I was, because I had been judging all women by my prior experiences with women. And like any individual, all of my prior experiences were based on the women I had chosen to be with. It wasn't like I had, done a blind study and gotten randomly selected members of the population. I had self-selected all of these women I would date. And I think they were all maybe in their own way reflecting my inherent need to take care of people. And so maybe that's what was going on. But she was the very first adult woman I could enjoy meeting and seeing her as an adult, and just to stand back and let her handle her life. And it was so great. It was so liberating. And I think that's another reason why, even if the authentic truth about oneself is scary to share, or you're sure it's going to be a deal breaker, I think it's worth the risk, because that kind of payoff doesn't come from people pleasing.
Yeah. And I feel like there's so much stuff you learn from that experience, and you would have never got there if you...
Right. Even if it had never worked out between her and me, I think that I would have ultimately continued with that same lesson in my head. I would have been a better man just for having known her and experienced that. So I think, and isn't that kind of true of all of us who have an observing ego, that we, no matter what failure it is, including cheating on a girlfriend, that no matter what experience we've had, if we can learn from that, do that critical incident debriefing we talk about sometimes, if I can learn from this failure, I can grow and be the better man and regret who I was in the past, but take some pleasure and joy in no longer being that person. And I think that's an option available to men and women, young and old. It's just, we're not, for some reason, we don't teach people how to do this stuff.
Yeah, not at all. Let me give you another scenario.
Oh.
What if in that scenario with the son, she looked at you and said those things, and you didn't say the things that you said?
Oh, well, you kind of asked me that question before, and I think maybe I dodged it. I don't know. But I think the misery there is that...
Or what's the loss, or what do you...
The loss is she doesn't really know who I am. And those poor women out there who are deceived by the men they date, they can't really know the man they're dating. So they don't even have a choice or a chance to love him for who he is.
And that's the thing. I think the
So
whole
both
thing,
people miss out.
yeah. And the thing we're talking about here is managing love intelligently. And that's one of the intelligent ways to manage it, by being authentic. And if you're looking for the type of love that allows for this sort of, that can sustain a lifetime and beyond or whatever, I feel like
A lifetime and beyond.
Well, you say something. Well, just a lifetime, that'll keep it simple. But in order to sustain a lifetime, and whatever happens, and maybe nothing, whatever. But it's you have to. If you're not being authentic, you're not going to. The love isn't going to be as rich, or it's not going to be as.
It's not even real. It's not even real because we don't know who each other is.
And that's what you need to love. You need to be real to.
Yeah. How can I go forward and think I'm loved when I've deliberately deceived her about who I am?
Let me ask you this: how many?
Oh my God, more.
How many?
But that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge.
If I haven't let her in on who I really am, whether it's the sins of the past or the weaknesses of the present or my fears of the future, and I think it takes courage for any of us to be open about those things with someone close to us. But if we don't do it, we don't really have real love.
Well, let me ask you this question.
You're horrible.
I got a lot of questions.
You're a horrible man.
What? How many people do you think on this planet have experienced real love, or are experiencing at the current moment? And you don't have to give an exact number, but
27. No, I actually think is having this conversation with you. I think any of us listening to this would say, wow, really a minority of people do that. And the key, I think, and part of the key is courage on the part of the person doing the sharing. But the other part, in terms of managing love intelligently, is for the person with the query or the person who's really desirous of knowing who they're dating, they have to do some work to make it safe. And working to make it safe doesn't allow one to say horribly judgmental things about others and making it unsafe. Oh, my last boyfriend was a real jerk. He used to drink Pepsi all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't drink Pepsi. And so whatever it is that, makes a relationship safe, and that means for whatever answer the answer is. And for all of us to take what I think is a supreme human pleasure in getting to know another person on their own terms, who they really are. I think it's a wonderful privilege for me as a therapist when my clients let me in on their lives. But I think that kind of honesty and vulnerability is available to any of us who just think about what would it take for this person talking to me to feel really safe, to be able to relax, to be okay with the truth, no matter where it takes us.
Yeah. And it takes both people in order to do that, right?
Yeah, because it does take courage, even if the other person is making it very safe. And, there are little kind of funny little tests that, would tell you if you're succeeding or not, because there's certain lies that are just so bold-faced that I think, for some, I've just had so many people lie to me over my lifetime that, in my office and outside, of course, personally, that you kind of get some sense of this. So making it safe, obviously, if I say to someone, well, if the subject at hand is sexuality and specifically sexual fantasies, and a fantasy is any thought that gives me sexual pleasure because it's not happening in real life right now. Mm-hmm. And the other day I had a wonderful couple in my office, and the question came up, and the wife said, well, I don't have any sexual fantasies. Mm. And actually, she was the second woman in 2 weeks who made the same claim. And that's just not credible. There's no way that is possible. And I said that to her, and I pointed out, because even if you're looking at an incredibly handsome movie star who really does it for you, that yearning in your heart to be, to admire him and be with him. I mean, like the thought of wanting to date someone like that, or to spend even just a lunch with somebody like that. Now, that's not a fantasy of intercourse, but I think we'd all agree it's a sexual fantasy, because she's attracted to him the way a woman is attracted to a man. And the same thing would be true of, the extremely religious who are so righteous that they don't even have unrighteous thoughts. And so they would say, no, I never have sexual fantasies. Well, really, you never ever have had because you do know lying is a sin too, right? So that tells me that I haven't yet made the room safe for them. And sometimes humor can help. Sometimes self-disclosure helps. Sometimes reasoning with someone can help. But, at the end of a date, if it's so much work to get somebody to open up that you feel like you should be getting paid at the end of the date for all the effort you've put in, well, that's too much.
Yeah.
It's just too much. And it's clear that we're not going to be able to have a truly honest, authentic relationship.
What did those women say? Did they eventually admit to having, or are they still working through it, or still?
One is still working through it. And the other one said, oh, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I have had sexual fantasies.
All right.
So, and her husband just went,
Yeah.
Because the text, in their relationship up until that point was that he was the sex deviant who was thinking about other women.
Okay.
And the reality is, no, she's just better at repression than he is. So she had successfully deceived herself that she was not having any sort of sexual fantasies.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on people being alone, or people saying, I'm going to end up alone? Or you hear people say this, right? I hear people say that all the time. I'm afraid of being alone. I just can't be alone. I don't want to be alone. So the question I was wondering is, do you think that you can be alone if you are authentically you?
You could. Wait, well, how did you mean that question?
Like, I mean,
you could end up being alone, or you could be alone happily.
Like, you could be alone. Like, you could be alone physically, I guess, as far as like by yourself, but happily. Yeah, happily alone. Yeah,
okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's another skill set, right? Because that's part of the answer to that question. Am I engaged in a life worth living? If I have a life worth living, well, then yes, of course I could be happy in that life, which is not to say I wouldn't yearn for somebody, or I wouldn't long for, a romantic partner, or that I would like to have a romantic partner. But I think a life like that is so rich that there's so much consolation between friends, career, the arts, nature, and all of the other things that make life meaningful, that along with that little wistful bit of sadness here and there, there'd be a great deal of joy in life. So, the way I put it to my clients, I think we all want to get to a point where a wonderful girlfriend becomes a wonderful part of an otherwise wonderful life.
Yeah.
Instead of making her the god of my life, and that everything depends on whether or not she likes me or she's with me.
Yeah.
Because then, the guys who don't ever get to where I'm talking about, they do end up losing her, because women do make great girlfriends and they do make great wives, but they do not make a great social support network or reason for living or a god upon the throne of our lives. I think women are just wonderful human beings who want to be treated and loved as human beings. And for so many men, her love or her attention and even possession of her is such an integral part of his sense of rightness with the universe that when she comes to her senses and dumps him, he goes crazy.
Yeah.
And then he turns into the stalker, or even, sadly, the domestic violence character who can ultimately even end up killing her.
That's a grim.
It's very grim. It's horrible. But I've had the female side of that as well. I've had my own stalkers, and it's not none of us want to get together with somebody who puts that undue emphasis on an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
We all are going to be best served by dating people who have lives worth living.
Yeah.
So,
and did these people who were stalking you, could you know, looking back now, are you like, yeah, they didn't have that established, and then that's makes them more susceptible to that behavior?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. But hard to know until you go out on a few dates and you get to know them. And then you do find out and it's like, get away.
So what are some ways that you would suggest people, if they maybe realize listening to this conversation, they're maybe like, well, I'm not being as authentic as I could be, like, what are some tips to do that? Like just be as honest as possible.
No, I've got a tip I think that works pretty well. I think it's easy for men to be much more authentic with male friends, for women to be more authentic with true true friends who are female. And just practicing that and looking at yourself and the behaviors that you engage in and the comfort with which you own your failings or your thoughts, your individuality. And to the degree that if we could call, I think the hierarchy goes something like, start with pets. And if we can have a decent, not abuse-free relationship with pets, we can move on to friends. And friends would be like the undergraduate school of intimacy. And I think romance would be the grad school level of intimacy, where if I can do this with my friends, then I can just maybe forget about the fact that she has a vagina for a second and just be as honest with her as I would be with my friends.
Yeah.
And I think for men,
you have to give up that neediness of needing this person to like you and blah, blah.
Yeah. And it's hard, I think, to give up neediness, right? You have to actually build a life where you're not as needy. So to do that, friendship, and I think having a circle of friends is really essential. And then having fun with your life and living your life and enjoying what you do. And then, when you meet somebody interesting and you ask them out and they accept, you have a life worth sharing at that point. And as you share your life, the life that is worth living, it may not be worth sharing in her eyes. And that's okay, because you don't want people who don't value you.
Yeah.
So there's like in sales, there's a numbers game here where there's only a percentage who are going to buy that vacuum cleaner. You can't sell a vacuum cleaner to everybody whose door you knock on.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to accept that there's going to be an overwhelming number of candidates who are going to find you quite forgettable.
So just think of yourself as a sales or a vacuum salesman,
or the vacuum itself. and you're just letting her in on your life a little bit. And if there's no chemistry, if there's no magic, well, okay, I didn't even make it past the first hurdle. And then, but that's also good intel, because I don't want to be with someone if we don't have chemistry.
Yeah.
So if I could just accept what the universe is telling me and go with it, I can then move on to the next candidate and the next candidate and so on. So starting with friends, being honest with friends, kind of getting a feel for that as an adult. And then as an adult dating, it's really hard, I think, for the people, at least it was for me when I was younger, because I just didn't have the observing ego to see how truly dishonest I was and how much I needed to grow in this area. So, cut yourself some slack. It's not that you're a bad person if you're going down the same road I did, because, the universe conspired against you to keep you from being quite as open as maybe you're going to grow into. But it's a process, and it's not a matter of, some sort of, gosh darn it, I'm going to repent. I'm going to be an honest, authentic person from now on. It doesn't work that way. Because it's a skill, like any other intimacy skill. It's a skill. It takes time. And also, I think it's incredibly important to develop a sense of humor around this, because we are all so comedically flawed. I mean, we're all really worth laughing at, and to be able to laugh at your own life and to laugh at your foibles is ultimately part of what's going to charm the right women or the right men, speaking to the women in the audience, charming the right person into our lives.
Great. And so would you agree with the statement, why authenticity matters? It matters if you're searching and want real love.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I thought the mic drop though was on that last thing I just said.
Okay, well, I'll maybe edit it out. So, all right, we'll wrap it up there. So,
I think the sense of humor is just so important. I don't want people to forget that because, we just take ourselves and love so freaking seriously, and to realize and just accept that the universe is absolutely jam-packed with people who couldn't care less about us and never will.
Yeah.
And if all the people who ever authentically loved you disappeared and you disappeared along with them, most of the rest of the world wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
That's how really tiny we are in this universe. And to just be humble with that and to have some sense of humor about that, I think it's important, but it's also very comforting, as we go through painful rejections or dates that just were really, yeah.
And remember to love yourself. All right. I'm going to wrap things up here. We have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question: Dear Stephen Ing, my husband gives me no physical affection. He recently adopted a dog and a cat and dotes on them. I'm enjoying our new pets too, but when I ask for more affection, he accuses me of being jealous of them. He is obviously able to be affectionate, but just not with me. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about leaving. What can I say to him so that he understands this is killing me? Thanks.
Nothing. There's nothing you can say to a man who doesn't get that. It's time to move on. I'm so sorry to put it that way, but I think counselors tend to be so mealy-mouthed and diplomatic. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and we also have that tendency to, well, what do you think about that, John or Mary? How does that make you feel? But if an adult man has gone so far in his life that he really doesn't get the whole notion of physical affection, it's really because that's who he is.
All right.
He just doesn't want it. It doesn't, it's not comfortable for him, and he doesn't want to give it. And then the other horrible possibility is, he really doesn't like her. He's not that into her. And he really likes the new puppy and the new kitten. And again, that's a harsh possibility. But the truth, this is part of my humanist faith, the truth is our friend. So I would rather know that than not know it. Because then she can say, I just don't think this is going to work out between us. And he might, if he even notices what she says anymore, he might say, well, huh? And she can say, yeah, because I'm sort of like the dog and the cat combined times 10. I want that much affection. And you're just never going to be able to give that to me comfortably, are you?
Yeah.
And if he's honest, I have a feeling if he could be his authentic self in that moment, he would say, well, no. What? Are you crazy? People don't do that.
Have you had people where they are able to give that to pets and not humans?
Oh, yeah.
Is that something that happens?
Absolutely. Yeah. For all kinds of reasons. We may all end up in the same place, but we didn't all get there in the same way.
Yeah.
So we each have our own story. But, at the end of the day, a lot of us, really, it's about who we are, not the message we're trying to send, or a message of rejection or that I don't care. It may be true that we don't care, but the message is somewhat irrelevant if the person says, no, I really do care about you, but they can never be affectionate. What does it matter?
Yeah.
For the person who's like let's say a 8 or a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of needing affection, and her partner is a 1 or a 2 or a 3,
Mm-hmm.
that's just going to be painful for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
He may be flogged, with guilt trips into being affectionate for a whole day or something, but it's going to be a task or a tedium to him. And for her, it's going to be like this taste of, oh, this is so great. And then it disappears for another 3 months or 6 months.
Mm.
So why not just accept people as they are and then find one you like just the way they are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So divorce, debriefing, intentional interview.
Try to do better next time.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the question. And thanks, Steve, as always. And thank you all for listening. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye now.